Good morning, everyone. I'm Alexandra Felix. I am going to be your facilitator for our session today. I'm going to welcome you right now to our session on navigating challenging conversations. All right. Before we just dive into it, I really want to, hang out for a second and talk about growth. Growth doesn't happen in a straight line. It often happens like a spiral in the sense that you have to go around the ring of a spiral a few times before sometimes you actually get the lesson. And that's what it's like with difficult conversations. We can have the same conversation over and over again, and afterwards tell ourselves, I could have done that better. I should have said something better. Hopefully, today you're going to learn something that's going to help you complete that ring and move to the next level in your spiral of upward growth. So let's go into this. First off, let's talk a little bit about what makes a conversation constructive or difficult. You'll see here we have a driving forces. No, I'm sorry. This is a force field analysis. So what it does is it's talking to us about the driving forces. So what is it that makes a conversation constructive? Well, first off, when we have a clear purpose and shared goals, that makes it constructive. If we're respectful in our tone and in our listening, if we have transparency and trust with the other person or people, if we have some timely feedback, and if we're open to collaboration and problem solving. This is really what makes a conversation collaborative and constructive. On the other side, we have what we call restraining forces, and these are the things that make a conversation difficult or challenging. So first off, when we have high emotions, if we're angry coming into the conversation, if we have fear about what's being said, if there's some frustration about the actual topic, we may also have some conflicting priorities. And sometimes we see some power dynamics. That also makes it difficult because if we look on the other side, it tells us that maybe we can't be transparent and maybe we can't exactly trust who's speaking. If we have ambiguity in expectations, we're not really sure how to approach the conversation. If we've had past negative experiences, we're walking into this with a little bit of angst. And if there's some pressure, maybe there's some timelines we need to resolve, something, we don't have enough resources. So all of these factors actually create a situation or an environment for the conversation itself to be very difficult. What's really important for us to really acknowledge and just pause on is it's not just what we say, it's how it feels. So when we know what to say, even though we have the right words, even though we have perhaps the right intentions, something deeper can get in the way. And what we're going to explore for the first part of this session is to explore what's happening beneath the surface. So what are those things that are going on in our minds that actually shift us from having a constructive conversation to a difficult conversation? First off, let's look at emotional triggers. So what neuroscience tells us is that our brain responds to social discomfort the same way it does to physical danger. What that means is if you stub your toe and you feel pain and somebody insults you or says something that makes you feel a little off, your brain interprets that as the same type of pain. And so you're going to have an emotional reaction. Our brains still respond to threats the way they did in the days of cavemen. So our brains are wired really for survival. So when we see our ancestors saw a tiger in the bush, they had an automatic threat response that made them get up and run away. But today, the threats that come at us are different. They're no longer about physical dangers, or not always. Today, especially in the workplace, the triggers really come through in the form of email, conversations, feedback, performance reviews. These aren't life-threatening the way a tiger in the bush would be, but our nervous system doesn't always know the difference, and so we respond in the same way. And this threat response is absolutely primal. It is not something that you think about. It's not something that you do. It's not something that you choose. It's automatic inside of you. And if ever you felt it, you'll actually know it. So what our threat response does is it tells us that we move towards rewards. So when we have something that's really good, there's a carrot, I'm moving towards it. When we have something that threatens us, and like we saw, it doesn't have to be a physical threat. It doesn't even have to be a real threat. It can be a perceived threat. The automatic response that we have is to move away from this threat. And we do that by fight, flight, or freeze. So fight means, maybe I'm going to stand my ground. I'm going to stand for myself. I'm ready to fight this battle. Flight means I am going to run away from this as fast as I can. I'm going to avoid it. Maybe I'm going to pretend it never happened. I will deal with my anxieties on my own. I'm not ready to share them. And freeze, sometimes that just means you're tongue-tied. You don't have the right words. You're not really sure what to say or what to do. You're just frozen in the moment, and then it passes by you. One of the first things that we're going to talk about then is that we want to start by noticing what's actually happening. So when we start to feel these threat responses coming, how do we actually experience it? Are we feeling it in a shift in our tone? So now maybe we're talking faster, or maybe a little bit more aggressive. Maybe our posture, maybe we're sinking into ourselves because we're afraid. Maybe we're standing up and puffing out our chest because we want to fight. What's our energy like? Is it nervous? Is it calm? Is it excited? And our mood. And am I feeling depressed by this? Am I feeling anxious by this? Am I feeling happy by what's happening? And what we want to do is make a quick judgment and kind of like say, where am I? So that we can notice where we are. And then we can have an inner dialogue like you would see here. Why would they say that? Oh, here we go again. Am I missing something? These are the things that are telling us that something is a little bit off. And what we need to do is understand where they're coming from. So I'm going to introduce you to the SCARF model. The SCARF model was developed by David Rock. He's an amazing coach. He wrote this book called Coaching with the Brain in Mind. And it's all about the neuroscience of our brains and how we respond to threats and what that means for us in a daily conversation and in our daily work. I'm going to first walk you through the model. Then we're going to talk about what each element means. And as I do this, I'm going to ask you to reflect on your own experiences and see really what fits. So let's go through the model. The first of the SCARF elements is status. So status refers to our relative importance to others. The second is C, certainty, and that's our ability to predict the future. A is for autonomy, and that is really having a sense of control over the events in our lives. And R is for relatedness. It's this feeling of belonging. It's this feeling of safety with others. And F is for fairness. So when actions are consistent and transparent. In every conversation, we're subconsciously scanning for cues of threat to reward in these 5 areas. And when we feel that one or more of these are at risk or that we feel supported, we're going to actually have a different response. So when we feel we're at risk, we're going to become defensive. So we're going to either fight, flight, or freeze the response. And if we feel supported, we're going to move towards collaboration. That's more about opening and participating. And again, I want to reinforce what David Rock tells us is that the brain reacts to a social slight in the same way it reacts to physical pain. So this is so deeply entrenched and visceral in us that it's hard to notice until sometimes it's already there. We're going to go through each of these elements, starting with status. So one of the things you might be asking yourself is, do I still matter here? So I'm in a conversation, maybe I'm in a meeting, things are happening around me. And what I'm looking for here in the space of status is to feel respected, seen, and valued for my contributions. And the triggers in the space of project management might be perhaps being cut off in front of others as you're speaking, perhaps receiving vague or condescending feedback, being left out of meeting invites or recognition emails. And sometimes it's not even intentional. It happens, but our reaction is still the same. Maybe getting bypassed in decision-making conversations. So the question I'm going to leave with you, and we're going to do this for each element, is I want you to have a think about this. When do you find yourself working hardest to prove your value? When you do, that's probably because you're having a threat response to status. So some things we're going to think about and once you're able to actually name where it's coming from, you can probably, think through it and understand what it means. So for example, if I'm receiving vague or condescending feedback, I might be saying, that's probably his or her lack of being able to express themselves versus what I've actually contributed or it being really directed right to me. The point is that once I've identified what the trigger is, now I'm able to soothe myself, calm myself, release that threat response, and move towards collaboration. So let's see what happens in the space of certainty. Certainty is about what's going to happen to me. Our brains really, really like stability. And so when we have uncertainty, we feel destabilized. And so the psychological need here is to feel clarity, predictability, and to have a sense of what's coming next. So here are some triggers that might start off a threat response. Perhaps changes to scope or direction without explanation. Vague expectations or unclear goals. Delayed decisions or ambiguous feedback. Or a lack of defined roles or timelines. Have you ever had that when you've gone into a project and you're just unsure what you should say, who you should say it to, what your role is if you're overstepping? What you're doing then is you are hesitating and pulling back, and that's probably more of an avoidance or a flight response. So I want you to think about, how do you react when the path suddenly shifts underneath your feet in a project or in life? Once you've understood that maybe it's a certainty issue, maybe you can work on yourself and ask yourself, so if I don't know all of these things, what do I know? What do I know about myself? As an example, this happens to me all the time. I'm in the space of change management, and I'm always going into environments where I don't know the people, I don't really understand the context, and I'm, not really sure of what's going to come. And what I have to tell myself is, I have experience, I've done this before, I need to trust the process. So that's the certainty that I bring in to counter the uncertainty of the situation. I hope that actually helps you. Let's move to autonomy. So autonomy is, do I have any say? And that's really the psychological need here, is to feel a sense of agency and control over how we work and sometimes where we work. Have you ever been assigned to a project that you really don't want to be on, working with a team that you don't want to be on, and you've just been assigned like, hey, you're going to join this team, and there's no word in it for you? So the triggers: being told what to do without any input, decisions made without your consultation, micromanagement or oversteering, no flexibility in approach or timelines. These are really hard things to deal with. And while we psychologically, or maybe at the back of our minds, we know, yeah, that's just his or her way of doing things, it still kind of grates underneath our nerves. So what we want to do here is, find that neutral balance, find that thing that helps you to balance it out. I'm going to be very honest with you. This one is really tough for me because I like just charging forward. And when somebody blindsides me in the sense that, no, I want you to pivot here, I want you to do this, or we're going to put you on this project. And sometimes I'm put on a project where I have no technical background. So that's now going to give me a sense of autonomy, like, hey, you didn't even ask me, but then uncertainty. So sometimes you can have multiple triggers and they compound, right? And you need to pull them apart. So in this case, is it more the autonomy? I'm upset because nobody consulted me, or am I uncertain because I don't know where I'm going into? In my particular case, I'm better able to deal with the uncertainty than I am with not having the autonomy. So that's my challenge. And I'm going to say that this is a consistent challenge that I have. So these are not only challenges that you might have inside of a conversation. These are triggers that are probably going off for you in multiple areas of your work and your life. And when they happen inside of a conversation, they just feel a lot bigger than they actually are. All right, let's move on to relatedness. Am I in or am I out? And the psychological need here is to feel included, connected, and part of the group. It's about feeling safe. I'm in or I'm out. So here are some triggers. Hybrid or remote team exclusion, right? That happens. You're not here, we don't talk to you. I know that the world has changed a lot and we've got a lot of hybrid. But then there are still things like, for example, there's a potluck at lunch and I don't live in the area, so I'm excluded from that. I don't have any mingle time. Maybe there are some side meetings that bypass your contributors. Transactional tone and communication, being the only one not in the loop. So what happens when people are talking about you, about your project, and you're not included in that? So now we've got a couple of double whammies again. So now not only have I not been included to the group, now they've made decisions without me, and they've just kind of said, oh, don't worry, we'll give you, here are your action items, just move forward with them. So now I've got some autonomy and some relatedness happening. You might be thinking I've been going through a lot of these, and I'll just tell you that when you work in projects and you work in large groups, complex projects in particular, these are happening all the time. And so it just takes that little moment to say, you know what, I was missed on the invite. It's not a big deal. I'm going to catch up, but maybe I'll take a separate action the next time. And maybe I'm going to reach out to the person who's organizing and say, hey, recognize that I was missed on it. I'm really disappointed that I wasn't able to be a part of that. Do you think maybe you can put me in the meeting invite for the next time, or put me in the group list so that I can be included? We can do little things like that that are going to help us feel a little bit more related and have a little bit more autonomy as well. And finally, fairness. You know, is this even fair? Is this even possible? And our psychological need here is to feel that decisions and treatments of ourselves, of others, of situations are fair and transparent. That can be a pipe dream, because sometimes things happen and we're not told that they're going to happen, and they're not fair. And you're going to hear life is not fair. But, you know, here's some triggers that might happen inside of a project. So maybe you have unequal recognition or resourcing. That's happened to me many times. And it kind of hurts, because you're like, I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this, and I was not recognized for it. Inconsistent consequences or standards, favoritism or hidden rules, lack of voice in key decisions, right? So here's something for you to think about. What kind of situations make you think, that's just not right? You know, there must be a better way of doing things, even though we might not be able to change the situation. The reason we've gone through all of these, and I hope you've really kind of heard a few things inside of them, is because these are your personal triggers. So in a sense, it's really your problem. So what you really want to do is be able to identify them. And once you've identified them, honestly, it's about 70% of the weight is taken away, because you understand what the trigger is. And now what you want to do is neutralize it. So that's the work you're going to do on your own. When it comes to how this shows up inside of a conversation, we're going to go through a couple of steps. So first, conversations don't become difficult because of what they said. They become difficult because of what gets triggered. I was delivering this training in a course, and there's one guy just kept saying, you know, that's okay. If that happens, I just move on to the next thing. And if that happens, he had absolutely no triggers. He was taking nothing personally. He just kind of moved on. And I just thought, you know what? That's the actual ideal response. I had a bunch of other people in that room that had a whole bunch of triggers. And so where we want to come to now is to say, if I'm able to recognize that I'm being triggered, and if you have those 3 to 4 seconds where you can just pause, right? Create a gap between how you're feeling and the action you're going to take or the words you're going to speak. So just have that pause. Maybe you'll have a sense to kind of go, is this status? Is this authority? Autonomy? Is it fairness? What's going on? Likely you won't in those few seconds, but at the very least you can pause and you can recognize that I'm feeling something that shouldn't come out of my mouth. We want to name that emotion or trigger. Maybe you have the time to say this feels like fairness, so relax on that. And then you have the time to respond with calm, clear, curious intent. So really what we want to do is when we feel those, we notice those feelings coming up. Again, remember, you feel a little bit of an emotional shift. You feel like you want to run away. You feel like you want to hide. You feel like you don't have your words. Those are all threat responses. And we want to just pause, name the emotion or the trigger, whichever works for you, and then choose something that helps you show up in the way that you need to. And one thing I really just want to impress upon you is that you don't need to fix the whole conversation. You just need to keep yourself in it. So maybe have a few lines in your back pocket of, I didn't think about it that way, or, I'm just going to take a second to think about it. Can you tell me a little bit more? Maybe show a little bit of curiosity, get them to speak. And maybe by you engaging a little bit, you're actually going to get your own answer. Because sometimes what comes back at you is, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to come out that way. Or my actual intent is for this. Can you clarify so that you can have that little pause so you can regroup for yourself and or maybe put it aside and say, I recognize this is happening. I'm going to put it away and I'm going to deal with this a bit later. For now, I just need to stay in the conversation. Take a deep breath and continue forward. I'm going to give you a second to think about all of that. Oh, so sorry. Did not fix this image. We're preparing now for a real conversation. So before we can navigate to a difficult conversation, we need to prepare with a bit of clarity. And I'm going to give you a really, really simple 4-step conversation framework. And it's really meant for you in those moments to step back and think, oh, how can I show up the way I want to here? So here's the framework. First of all, is start with intention. One, we're going to acknowledge the emotional dynamics. So at this point, I'm seeing in myself, perhaps I'm feeling my own trigger. It might also happen that you can see this trigger in another person, because we have to remember that on both sides of the conversation, these are emotional responses and threat responses that are happening to both of us. So maybe I'm able to see that it's happening on both sides. By starting with intention, what I'm going to do is I'm going to address status, certainty, and relatedness. How do I do that? I'm going to start by saying, this is what I want to talk about. This is and this is kind of like my perspective. This is how I'd like for us to deal with this. So you're really starting with that foundation of I'm coming into this collaboratively. Then you want to maybe describe the situation. So be neutral without triggering, just what's happening. You want to share the impact. So highlight without blaming what's actually happening. So if there's a situation or a behavior that you need to address, what is that behavior doing to other people? What's the impact that it's having on the team? When we are sharing this impact, we are allowing the person to have a sense of autonomy, because I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just sharing with you what's happening. And I'm going to let you make your own choices. And there's going to be some fairness, because I'm just being, laying things out on the table, and I'm not blaming, I'm not accusing, I'm trying to be very open and transparent. And then make a clear ask or an invitation. So here we want to use inclusive choice-based language. Again, this goes back to autonomy because I'm asking for you. I'm not telling you what you need to do. It also gives the person a sense of certainty. So I know what's expected of me. I know what perhaps a corrective action could be. And so then I can show up a little bit differently, but I'm not left with vague feedback that leaves me thinking people don't like me. Let's now look at this scenario. So let's say we have a scenario where some team dynamics are off. A project team member from another vendor dominates meetings, interrupting or speaking over others, including the client. You've noticed that morale and engagement are slipping, and you're preparing for a one-on-one conversation. So we're going to take this little framework to help you to prepare for a difficult conversation. And I think it's difficult. Why? Maybe because of the dynamics, because it's a vendor, maybe because lots of different things, maybe because I have my own triggers and I'm not comfortable expressing all of these things, lots of things happening. But let's look at how the framework can help us. So first, by starting with intention, I'm going to acknowledge the emotional dynamics. And here's an example of what I might say. I wanted to connect because I really value your contributions and the energy you bring to the team. All right, so I'm acknowledging where we are. Then you want to describe the behavior and be neutral to avoid triggers around status and fairness, among other things. In the past few meetings, I've noticed times where others start to speak and you've jumped in before they finish. So I'm stating the behavior as an observation without judgment. Now I'm going to share the impact, highlighting without blaming what's happening. Some team members have pulled back a bit, and it's impacting engagement, and we may be missing valuable input. So that's really, in a way that's very neutral, sharing with the person what is missing, what's happening, what the impact is. And then the clear ask using inclusive choice-based language. Would you consider pausing before responding to check if someone is finished to create more space for everyone? Pause and see and ask. And I'm going to ask you to ask yourself because I can't hear your responses in this. But really thinking about it, if I'm going into this in a way where I'm feeling maybe status, like maybe it's a vendor who actually has a little bit more authority or connections into my sponsor than I have. So my status threat is triggered. Maybe I have some uncertainty because I don't know how this person's going to take what I'm going to say. Maybe I have a little bit of relatedness of if I say this, is this person going to hate me forever and not include me anymore? I have all of my own triggers happening here. But what this framework helps me to do is it helps me to really just think about how can I express a difficult situation and have a difficult conversation in a way that opens the door for that other person to show up and be collaborative. You don't know how they're going to show up. So let's say they get triggered even if you do all of this work. Well, maybe in the moment you'll understand which part, where they were triggered. And maybe they'll show up a little bit more collaboratively. But what you're doing is, at the very least, you are presenting yourself as somebody who is intentionally trying to be respectful, avoid the triggers. If new triggers come up, you can use the same process and ask with intent and curiosity. Why do you feel that way? Can you explain that to me? Tell me a little bit more, and let that person work through their own trigger. When they do that, oftentimes what happens is they'll step back and say, oh, I get it. And it's they'll catch themselves. They won't have the right words because they don't know about these triggers or they don't know how to name them, but they'll understand that they have been triggered, and that gives them the opportunity to show up in a different way. So from insight to action. What changes in the moment? We start with self-awareness, and the SCARF model is a fabulous little tool to help you to understand your own awareness of self and your own triggers. It also helps you in the awareness of others. So what's happening to them? What do you notice in terms of changes to their words, to their tone, to their physical being, to perhaps their facial expressions? That's going to help you to see what's shifting and if they're being triggered. And then finally, choosing the response that allows you to act with intention instead of with reaction. So for this, we're going to pause, we're going to name the feeling or the trigger, and we're going to choose. And then again, we have this little framework that's really going to help us to actually reformulate when we have the time for it and be prepared to have these conversations. So a final note is that mastery is when awareness, empathy, and intention work together, even under pressure. And I will tell you from my own personal experience that in some areas, and perhaps for some triggers, it'll be easier for you to get over than for others. If you have multiple triggers that are happening at the same time, you need to work through them one at a time. And what I do when that happens is I try to find one that resonates well for me and land on that, and then use that to help me work through some of the others. So I want to end our session today by thanking you for listening, and I hope you found something that was worthwhile in this. Change starts in the conversation. So the most powerful conversation doesn't come from having the perfect words. It comes from having the courage to show up with presence, clarity, and care. And I'm going to leave you with this last final question. What shift are you ready to make in how you show up for difficult conversations? So on that note, my friends, I want to say thank you. And I hope you've enjoyed this session. And if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you.